Hi, I'm Sherry Damaris, and welcome to Macro Magic. Today I have with me Alex Jack, and I'm so excited to have him. You may have seen his name on a few books that he co-authored with Michio Kushi, the founder of Macrobiotics in the United States. And Alex is brilliant, and he's done so much work in our country to help sustain the agricultural integrity of our whole grains, especially. He's a food activist, he's a macrobiotic teacher, and he's an author. His latest book is called The Spiral of History. So welcome, Alex. So nice to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sherry. I'm delighted to be here.
And tell us a little bit about how you got started in the whole field of macrobiotics and your interest in working with agriculture and, really the integrity of the quality of our food.
Yeah, well, my journey into food and diet and health began in the mid-1960s when I went to India as an exchange student, and I became vegetarian. And then a year later, I went to Vietnam as a journalist. And in the course of my stint in Saigon and throughout the country, I made contact with the young Buddhist students who were advocating for a more peaceful solution between the United States backed South Vietnamese government and what was called the Viet Cong, which was backed by North Vietnam, Soviet Union, and China. And so in the course of my stay, I had the opportunity to interview the Vietnamese spiritual leader of the country named Thich Tri Quang. He was a Zen master, a Buddhist monk, and at the time he was taking sanctuary in a large pagoda in the Saigon area because his followers had led peaceful street demonstrations throughout Vietnam on several occasions, which had resulted in the fall of the Saigon government. And so they were very concerned that a new outbreak of peaceful protest would topple the dictatorship. In any event, I, as a journalist, was able to go into the pagoda, which was ringed by tanks and by militia, and interview him. And we had a very interesting conversation about the political and military and cultural situation in Vietnam. And at one point in our talk, he asked me what I'd been doing, and I said I had been on an aircraft carrier in the Gulf of Haiphong, from where the bombing raids from the United States were bombing every day, hundreds of raids on Hanoi and Haiphong. And I said that some of the pilots had told me that they had stashed nuclear weapons on board the aircraft carrier, which was highly provocative, and nobody knew about this. So I told him about that, and he said, yes, it's tragic. I've heard the same thing from Hanoi through the underground, that the Soviets had brought in tactical nuclear weapons. And then I said, aren't you afraid that this could lead to World War III, through accident or some soldier who sets it off on his own accord? And he then said, Alex, he says, there's something far worse than nuclear war. And at that point, everything dissolved, and I couldn't think of anything worse than World War III. Having grown up in the 1950s and early 60s at the height of the Cold War, because we knew that the world could be destroyed in 24 hours. And I said, I beg your pardon, what could be worse than World War III? And his reply was the rice. And again, I drew a total blank. And I said, rice? What does rice have to do with this? And then he proceeded to explain to me, he said, because of the bombing and the defoliation, my country can no longer feed itself. The rice fields had been destroyed. We're now dependent on rice from your country, from the United States. And all of that rice coming into our country, as he described it, he says, it is not alive. It is not living. Has no life. And I knew by that he meant that it was 100% polished white rice. And he proceeded to explain to me that food was the foundation of life and also culture. And he went into all of the impacts that food had on us, from basic health and vitality to our social and economic system, to political consciousness, to art and culture. And anyways, a total revelation. I never heard anything like it. And he said, this is what I'm most concerned about, because Vietnam is a small, decentralized country. We will probably survive a nuclear war. It will destroy America. It will destroy Europe, Soviet Union, and Japan, and the industrialized countries. But our small little country, even with tremendous fallout, will probably survive and at some point continue. But he says, if the rice goes, which it is now going because of your chemicalization and the war, he says, that's the end of my culture. And he says, this is what I worry about at night. This keeps me up. I can't sleep thinking about the rice and my country's future.
Yeah, that's
So that was a huge revelation.
It's such an amazing story, and I think it fits into your passion for working, to save the quality of these rice, and all the things that you've been so instrumental in doing. And I know that you and I had taught together a lot in Amsterdam, and that you went with the director of the Kushi Institute there, Albert Nelson, and visited the rice fields of Italy and France. Would you like to share with us some of the insights you've gained from those trips?
Yes, after my Vietnam experience, I returned to the United States, where I was living in Boston, and I took my first classes with Michio Kushi, who was the leading educator in the macrobiotic community at that time. And he was actually, his first lecture was exactly the same as the Zen master in Vietnam, that food governs our destiny. So I became a macrobiotic teacher. I became, as a journalist, then I started working for East West Journal, which was the main magazine of that era, and became the editor-in-chief. And then at some point when I became involved with the Kushi Institute in Amsterdam, an extension school there, and then with the director, Albert Nelson, we took an amazing journey. It was, I think, in the year 2001, in which we traveled through southern France and northern Italy, which is the rice-growing regions of Europe. And we retraced the journey of Thomas Jefferson, who was the American author of the Declaration of Independence and the third president. But in between those two positions, he served as ambassador to France during the Revolution in order to get French support for the American Revolution. And at one point, he had a little time, and as a farmer and a planter in Virginia, he had heard that the British had destroyed the rice crops, which were, feeding not only the soldiers, but many people throughout the South. And so he had heard that the rice quality in southern France and Italy was very high quality. And he wanted to go personally to obtain seed, because it was illegal to distribute seed, because it was the heart of their economy. So he personally went on a month-long journey in his carriage, horse-drawn carriage, into that region. And there's a wonderful story that he actually smuggled out the rice seed in the sleeves of one of those 18th century jackets with long sleeves. He actually put the seeds in there, and he went through the customs, because there was a penalty of death for anybody who smuggled them out. But he risked that because he felt it was important to revive the rice crop in the United States. Wow. So we actually retraced his journey, and it was a remarkable experience.
And you've also taken on his spirit in terms of really helping in America sustain the good quality of rice that we grow in California. So I know that you created Planetary Health, which is a nonprofit foundation to actually help publish books and teach people about rice, but also to advocate, for non-GMO rice. Did you want to share with us some of those experiences?
Yes. In fact, after I got back from Amsterdam that same year, we started Planetary Health nonprofit organization, and our first project was called Amber Waves of Grain. And Monsanto had just announced that they were going to introduce genetically engineered rice in the Sacramento Valley in California, which is the center for organic rice production in the United States. And if they had succeeded, it would inevitably have contaminated both the organic and the conventional rice crop. So it was an existential crisis, I think, in the natural foods movement throughout the United States if we were to lose our supply of organic and natural brown rice. So with a colleague, I went out to California, and we organized the farmers into a network to oppose this. It was very peaceful. It was through mostly education and petitions and meeting with the Rice Council in Sacramento, which is the organization of the rice farmers. Anyway, the bottom line was that we were successful, and Monsanto was defeated, and they were never able to introduce GMO rice in California or anywhere else in the country. So the United States remains GMO-free with rice. We also did the same thing with wheat because Monsanto launched another initiative to introduce wheat, which is a much bigger crop in the United States, and of course the source for bread and flour products. And they were set to go. And again, we organized our various allies and so forth, including the Wheat Council in Washington, D.C., which was the main trade lobby for wheat. And they asked us to present the case against Monsanto, and we did, and we won. So that was successful too.
Yeah, we really have you to thank for all this hard work you've done, Alex. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about rice and your exciting new project called the Spirit of Rice Project.
Boardwalks built for fun. Legendary rock and roll clubs.
This is how we do it.
Casinos by the ocean.
Hippity hop.
Now that's New Jersey. 130 miles of beautiful beaches, solid rock, and everything in between.
Look in the window.
Now that's New Jersey. Plan your New Jersey trip at visitnj.org. Waves of fun. Nights of excitement. And a trail of memories. Now that's New Jersey.
Hi, I'm Sherry Damaris. Welcome back. I'm with Alex Jack, who's a food activist as well as a macrobiotic teacher and author of many books with Michio Kushi. We talked about his experiencing the various trips he's made looking at the rice fields. And I particularly wanted to ask you, Alex, why, I know there's a big push now to eat more on grains. What is an on, and why is that so important?
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. Yeah, on, AWN, is just a scientific term for the long bristle or thin hair that protrudes from growing grains in the field. So if you've ever been in a grain field, a wheat field or a field of barley, you'll see that they have these beautiful long antennae. In fact, they serve as kind of antenna to pick up waves and vibrations from the cosmos. And the basic theory is that by eating whole grains that are awned, that energy is gathered and it collects into the head of the grain. Of course, the awn and the outer hull are discarded when the grain is processed, but that kind of energy coming in is a very uplifting, universal type of energy. And it's the kind of energy we find that the world religions talk about all the time, that kind of higher consciousness. So the idea is that if you eat grains that have been awned, then it gives you kind of a higher, more elevated awareness. Of course, there are many other types of awareness and sources, but anyway, that is a kind of a main one coming directly in our daily food. Well, as it turns out that in the prehistoric world, all wild grains were awned. But in historic times, when agriculture began, particularly in the Far East, they discovered that the awns on the rice, particularly, were very hard to take off, and they also resulted in smaller yields. So they started to breed what were called awnless rice grains, in which they didn't have the antenna. And so they could produce more, and it was save money and so forth. So throughout pretty much the Far East, the rice was awnless. So we think that theory is that may have reduced consciousness to some extent. Whereas the grains of wheat and barley, they had a totally different physical mechanism, so that the awns actually gave higher yields. So that from ancient times until today, all of the barley and most of the wheat still is awned. So when we eat that wheat and barley, we're getting this kind of charge, whereas the rice today is still suitable for good health, but we're not getting, you might say, more spiritual kind of energy. However, it turns out there's a second major strain of rice in the world, which was native to West Africa. And so from ancient times, the West African civilizations based, for example, in Mali and right around the Niger River Valley area south of the Sahara, they grew rice as their main food, and it was all awned rice, and even today some of that rice is still awned. And the interesting thing is that most of the enslaved Africans who were brought to this country to work the plantations in the South, in the Carolinas and Georgia and Virginia, they came from West Africa, and they were rice farmers who had been abducted, who had been trafficked to the United States. And so when they came here, they were often put to use growing rice. But the rice they grew was not from Africa, it was from the Far East, because that was the original strains that had been grown by the planters, the white planters. But they had brought, some of them, seeds on the slave ships from Africa, the awned grains. So they grew the awned rice in their own little tiny patches in the slave quarters, the little gardens that they were able to grow for themselves. So they kept the tradition alive, and they called the rice, interestingly enough, they called it American without the A, American. And so some of that rice survived, and just recently, within the last couple of years, there are groups of Black, or you might say African-American farmers in the American South who've revived that rice. And it's also been grown in the Caribbean. And so they're now regrowing it here in the United States. Beautiful long awns. So it's the only rice, except for some that our macrobiotic friends now are growing here in New England, that is awned.
Yeah, and that just brings us up to our new exciting project. Alex and I and a few others have put together to show how they are growing awned rice in the New England area, specifically at South River Miso Farm in Conway, Massachusetts. So we have created a project, a film project, a documentary, and we are on the GoFundMe website raising money for that documentary to teach people how to grow on rice. And it's called the Spirit of Rice Project. Alex, did you want to share a little bit of information about this new exciting upcoming project?
Yes, this is very exciting because I think, like most people, we've been taught that rice only grows in hot, warm climates and environments. In the United States, for example, Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, California too, because it's hot and very warm. But it turns out that rice can grow in virtually any environment and climate. And you can grow both paddy rice, that means irrigated rice, or what's called dryland rice, which is ordinary kind of moisture, rainfall, like wheat or barley. And there's a farmer in central Massachusetts by the name of Christian Elwell, who actually has a miso company, but he also grows grains and vegetables. And he's been growing both dryland and paddy rice for the last 30 years. And he got some awned rice, originally from Ukraine and Russia, that was awned, and he's been growing. And so he has this beautiful rice in his field. And so we've started a film project to document the annual cycle of the rice growing through the 7 major stages or steps in the course of a year. And we were there over the winter solstice. Sherry was there, and Marley, who's actually behind the camera for this show, was there taking the first shots for the film. And so we're going to be going up there on 7 occasions through all of the stages, from the seed selection to the planting, to the caring for the rice during the summer, and then through the harvest, and then the natural processing. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and we hope that the film will be distributed and shown in classrooms around the country to encourage young people particularly to start growing some of their own food, especially grains and rice if they can. And also, of course, rice is one of the key foods that will help reduce global warming and contribute to mitigating climate change. Mm-hmm. So it's a really important film on many different levels, and we're excited about it.
It's so fabulous. You've worked with so many facets of whole grains, specifically rice, through your Planetary Health website. Did you want to share with viewers how people can access that and make contributions to the Spirit of Rice film and some other projects that you have going on?
Yeah, we have several websites. Our main one, you might say, is www.planetaryhealth.com. And on that site, you can donate to the Spirit of Rice project. Another project, interestingly enough, is where we actually are doing a macrobiotic diabetes study with a local hospital here, in which they're going to refer diabetic patients to us. And over the course of several months, they're going to be eating, a balanced whole foods diet centered on brown rice, millet, and other healthy grains. And we're hopeful that most of them will get off of insulin. They have type 2 diabetes, within a relatively short time, and that this project could be a model then for communities all over the country. And we've got the full support of this big hospital. It's the biggest hospital in Western Massachusetts, has 4,000 employees. So this is a really big event, and we're going to be starting this. We had to delay it this past year because of COVID, but we'll probably start the class or the educational aspect online this spring.
And it's so important in this time of COVID, as they're saying, there's such a direct link with diabetic people suffering so much from the virus. So I really applaud your work on that, Alex. Other things are that your books are out, The Spiral History. Do you want to just share a little bit about your recent book?
Yes, I've started a series of books entitled Spiral of History based on Michio Kushi's basic template, namely that history is now accelerating and kind of reaching a climax. And so the basic idea is that everything is now converging. And sometime in the next 15 or 20 years, we'll be coming to an inflection point where the world will really have to come to grips with all of the multiple crises that we're facing. I'm optimistic that we'll pass safely through, but again, because of a world with nuclear weapons and of course the magnitude of climate change and so many other factors, the violence, the hate, the prejudice, discrimination, all of these will need to be resolved to some extent, but I'm hopeful that we'll pass safely through this in the 2030s and we'll move into a much brighter, healthier future. Anyway, that book, as well as many others, are available online on that website, planetaryhealth.com.
Yeah, and I think to really help support a brighter, happier future, it's great that people visit your website and look at your projects and support all your work, since they are all agriculturally based and sound and so important for the, not only the health of the environment, but the health of our whole economy and health of our bodies. So I applaud your work, Alex. It's just been amazing what you've done. And again, how can people reach you if they want to just reach out and ask you questions or connect with you on some of these projects? Is it through the planetaryhealth.org website?
.com.
Okay, .com.
Yeah, so you can check us out on the website. My personal email is actually Shenhua at bcn.net. That's capital SHENWA at bcnboycatnancy.net.
Great. And as the Spirit of Rice film documentary proceeds, we'd like to check in with you once in a while to see how things are going with that project, that educational film. And for those of you who are interested in donating to the project, it's on GoFundMe, Spirit of Rice Film Project, it's called, and you can make any amount donation, and it's all tax deductible since Planetary Health is a, you're a tax-free entity. So I encourage people who are interested in supporting the film to reach out, and also you'll see progressions on that website as to how the film is going. So thank you so much for being on, Alex. I just find all your stories fascinating, and I'm sure the viewers will enjoy seeing you and reading your latest book, Spiral of History. And come back and visit us again sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sherry. Look forward to it.
Mm-hmm. And that's it for Macro Magic. Please join us for another episode, and we'll hopefully have Alex back in the near future.